The early season wind swept across the Fort Valor training grounds, a base perched halfway up the Rockies where the earth was caked in red dust and the sound of commands cracked through the air like thunder. That day, the first wave of NATO joint recruits gathered at the front gate. Every face carried a mix of anticipation, anxiety, and a trace of youthful pride. Amid the echo of boots and the smell of gunpowder, an old 1985 Ford F-150 rumbled in, exhaling smoke like a tired sigh. The door opened, and Avery Cole stepped out. She didn't look like anyone else there. No crisp uniform, no fire in her eyes. Just a faded t-shirt, a frayed backpack, and a pair of worn combat boots that looked like they'd marched through hundreds of miles of wind and sand. Her hair was tied low and neat enough to be unnoticed, and her pale gray eyes seemed to look straight through both space and people alike. She stood there in silence, hands in her pockets, as if she were listening to something far away, a signal only she could hear. "Hey, look at that. Is she lost?" a male recruit muttered. "Looks like she came to hand out lunch, not to train," another joked. Laughter rippled through the group. Avery didn't answer. She just walked straight toward the formation line, her gaze not touching anyone. When Captain Mason Hart, commanding officer of Fort Valor, arrived, the recruit snapped to attention. Tall and broad-shouldered, his voice rang out like iron striking iron, the kind of tone people instinctively feared. But when his eyes landed on Avery, a faint frown creased his brow. "You there," he barked, pointing directly at her. "Are you lost? The logistics office is around back. This is a training zone, not a bread line." The group burst into laughter. Avery turned around. No anger, no protest. Just a calm, steady look, the kind that made the air drop 10 degrees colder. "No, sir," she said slowly, her voice low and firm. "I'm a recruit." Captain Hart narrowed his eyes, then let out a short, derisive laugh. "A recruit, huh? Fine. Just don't slow the others down." He turned away, barking orders once more, but the laughter behind Avery lingered. Some of the recruits elbowed each other, whispering to one another. "Probably a gender quota thing. She'll quit in a week, tops." She heard it all, every word, but her face didn't move an inch. Another recruit, Eli Grant, glanced at her, and something in Avery's expression made him pause. Not fear, something quieter, something deeper, a stillness he'd never seen in anyone before. Avery adjusted her backpack and stood at attention, her hands at her sides, her eyes fixed straight ahead. The sunlight touched her sun-browned cheek, casting a faint golden edge around her face. From a distance, she might have looked fragile, but up close, you'd feel something else, a strength that didn't need to announce itself, like an undertow beneath calm waters. That was the first moment. Fort Valor, a fortress of pride and ego, had no idea it had just welcomed the one person who would make the entire base bow its head. The next morning, the fog still hadn't lifted from the hills surrounding Fort Valor. The red earth was damp, and the cold wind threading through the barbed wire fences made the entire base seem to be holding its breath. The blare of training whistles echoed across the field, signaling the start of another grueling day. Avery Cole stepped onto the grounds, buttoning her collar tightly, her calm eyes sweeping over the line of recruits. She was still the target of whispers and disdainful looks, but unlike the first day, no one laughed out loud anymore. They only murmured. The morning drill was the M4 disassembly and reassembly test, one that most recruits dreaded. 2 minutes to strip, clean, and reassemble. No mistakes, the supervising sergeant barked. Anyone over time will repeat until you pass. Dylan Reeves, the guy who never stopped mocking Avery, marched up first. He moved fast, grinning smugly as he finished at 1 minute and 43 seconds, but the components were misaligned, the stock loose, the barrel scratched. The sergeant shook his head. Do it again. Then came Brooke Tanner, the blonde girl who always sneered at Avery. Her face went pale from nerves. Her hands trembled so badly that she dropped the safety pin. 1 minute, 59 seconds, and one assembly error. No one was perfect. Until Avery stepped forward. There was no tension in her face. She simply knelt, removed her gloves, and drew a deep breath. The timer started. No words, no hesitation, only movements. Precise, fluid, almost uncanny. Pins slid out, the barrel detached, and each component lay neatly on the tarp like a dance perfected over years of repetition. 52 seconds. No errors. Not a single wasted motion. The sergeant froze for a few seconds, then bent down to inspect each part. Everything was flawless, textbook perfect. He looked up at her. Where did you learn that? Avery answered softly, eyes lowered. I practiced, sir. A faint smile crossed the sergeant's face, a rare expression in this place. In the corner, Eli Grant, the young recruit who had always watched her quietly, nodded slightly. There was a light in his eyes, as if he'd just understood something he couldn't yet put into words. Rumors spread like wildfire. By break time, everyone was talking about the silent girl with the extraordinary hands. Some said she used to be a weapons tech. Others guessed she'd served in special operations. Dylan sneered. She just got lucky. Let's see how she holds up on a real field. But his voice no longer sounded as sure as before. That afternoon, the navigation test began. Each team received a map and compass and had to cross the misty forested hills within a time limit. Avery went alone, her steps light on the carpet of dry leaves. The wind rustled through the pine branches, carrying faint laughter from Dylan's group ahead. She stopped under a tree, checked her map, and took note of her bearing. Just then, Kyle, another recruit, and his buddies approached. Hey, Dora the Explorer, he jeered. You lost? Or picking wildflowers? Before she could answer, he snatched the map from her hands, tore it in half, and tossed the pieces into the wind. The paper fragments spiraled away into the forest. Avery simply watched them go, her eyes cold as stone. Hope you know your way back, she said evenly, her voice flat as a still lake. Then she turned and walked away without looking back. Kyle's group burst out laughing, but the laughter faded as they realized she had vanished into the fog, and they weren't so sure they were heading the right way anymore. By late afternoon, the teams returned to camp. Several groups were late. Avery arrived first, boots caked with dirt, hair damp with sweat. Yet her gaze was calm as ever. When the sergeant checked her map, he saw she was carrying another one, neat, untorn. Eli Grant noticed and smiled. He was the one who had quietly given her a spare earlier. Thank you, she murmured. No problem, he replied, turning away. That night in the barracks, while everyone buzzed about the gun test, the torn map, and the mysterious girl who crossed the fog alone, Avery sat silently on her iron bed, cleaning her boots. Metal clinked softly. The lamplight brushed across half her face. Beneath that silence, there was something more profound than patience, a strength hidden away, waiting for the right moment to rise. Fort Valor was beginning to realize she wasn't lost. She was the quiet wind that was already changing the direction of the entire base. The third morning at Fort Valor, the air was so heavy you could almost hear your own heartbeat. The cold bit through the dawn. Every breath came out as mist. Each recruit carried a backpack weighing nearly 20 kilos, ready for the terrain run, the camp's infamous 10-mile endurance test. No stops, no mercy. Avery tightened her laces, tying the second knot with an unfamiliar loop. It wasn't the kind of knot a novice would make. It was a survival tie, the kind only those who had seen real combat terrain would know. But no one noticed. They just looked at her the way people look at someone stubbornly out of place. The whistle blew. The group surged forward, boots pounding against the hills. Brooke Tanner ran behind Avery, panting hard yet still managing a sneer. "Come on, Charity Case, don't fall behind!" Avery said nothing. Her breathing stayed steady, eyes fixed ahead. At the halfway mark, the ground began to slope. Complaints rose from the line. Mud slicked their boots, wind slapped against their faces. Dylan Reeves pushed ahead, deliberately bumping her shoulder. Avery stumbled, lost her footing, and slid down the incline, mud splattering across her uniform. The group stopped. A few snickered. "Nice one, Cole," Dylan called out. "Practicing your crawling?" From a distance, Captain Mason Hart blew his whistle. "Mitchell! Broke formation! Squad loses points!" he roared, not caring why. The squad turned toward Avery, eyes full of irritation and blame. Brooke muttered just loud enough for her to hear. "Please don't drag the whole team down with you." Avery pushed herself up. She didn't argue, didn't defend herself. Her face was streaked with mud, her boots heavy, but her eyes were unchanged. She just nodded once and kept running. No complaints. No excuses. When the team finished, she was ordered to run 5 extra laps. 10 miles behind her, now 5 more around the sandlot. Under the harsh sun, mud dried and cracked across her clothes. Sweat ran down her forehead, mixing with red dust. A few recruits watched her. Some shrugged. Others turned away. No one helped. Brooke tossed an empty water bottle toward her and laughed. "Hydrate with air, sweetheart!" Avery bent down, picked it up, and squeezed. The sound of crumpling plastic snapped through the silence. She tossed it into the trash bin, turned back, and kept running. Each stride firm, each breath steady. That night, when the camp had fallen asleep, she sat by the window, holding an old photograph. Her and a man in a black jacket, his face blurred by time. Under the dim light, she brushed a finger across the corner of the photo and whispered to herself, "I'm keeping my promise, sir." The wind outside swept through the base, carrying the faint echo of training whistles. Inside the small room, she closed her eyes and let the memories return. 3 years earlier, she stood in another training camp. Smaller, colder, quieter. The man from the photograph, Ghost Viper, had spoken to her in a voice cold as tempered steel. True strength doesn't need noise. The one who can stay silent is usually the last one standing. She didn't answer, only nodded. That memory still lived in every movement she made, in every breath, and in every step she took. The next day, Fort Valor entered the night combat simulation. Light rain fell, tracer flares carving streaks of light across the black sky. Shouts echoed, blank rounds fired, wire lines whistled in the dark. The recruits struggled to establish a defensive perimeter. Avery worked silently, driving stakes, tightening ropes, tying knots. Marcus, a tall, loud recruit, swaggered over, knocking down the wire she'd just secured. "Oops, sorry, princess," he laughed. "Guess this isn't really your thing, huh?" The group broke into laughter. Dylan joined in. "Don't worry, Marcus. Maybe she's better at embroidery." Avery bent down, picked up the rope, retied it. Slow, precise, wordless. Marcus grew irritated by her silence. He kicked at the mud, splattering it across her hands. "Come on, princess," he taunted. Maybe you'll get a medal for cleaning up tomorrow." She stopped. Her mud-covered hands trembled just for a second. Then she looked up straight into his eyes, her voice low and cold. "Are you done?" No shouting, no anger, just one question, enough to make Marcus step back half a pace. He forced a laugh and turned away. Avery said nothing more, only finished the perimeter. When the drill ended, Marcus's team lost points. Their perimeter lines had come loose and the wires were untied. No one saw Avery near that area. Only Eli Grant, from a distance, watched her walk away, a faint smile touching his lips. Not amusement, but understanding. He realized that at Fort Valor, someone was teaching them a lesson, not through words, but through the way she lived. That night, the wind swept again through the barracks windows. Avery lay on her bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. In the silence, you could almost hear a storm forming, not outside, but within her. And it was only a matter of time before that storm broke loose. The next morning, the fog lifted slower than usual, but no one had time to notice. The entire Fort Valor base had gathered on the training field. Today was the long-range shooting evaluation, one of the decisive tests that would determine who stayed. The air was heavy as lead, the metallic clatter of weapons, the sound of gun parts being assembled, the tense rhythm of breathing. Everyone was on edge. Everyone wanted to prove themselves. Avery Cole walked to the last firing line, quietly taking her position. Her uniform was still simpler than the rest, her shirt older, her cap pulled low over half her face. Dylan Reeves glanced over with a smirk. "If she hits the target, I'll eat my hat." Brooke Tanner, arms crossed, added coolly, "Maybe she'll beg for pity points instead." The whistle blew. Everyone held their breath. Brooke fired first. 5 shots, 2 missed, 3 barely grazed the edge. Her face went pale, her hands shaking. Dylan went next. 4 hits, 1 wide, still below standard. He turned, smirking. "Your turn, Cole. Hope you know which end of the gun is which." Avery didn't reply. She simply stepped forward and lowered herself into position. No noise, no expression, only stillness, as if the wind itself had stopped. One hand on the rifle body, the other adjusting the sight. Quick, precise, so exact that even the sergeant nearby turned his head. She didn't inhale deeply like the others. She didn't aim long. The rifle cracked. Once, twice, 3, 4, 5. 5 shots, each one spaced evenly, like a heartbeat. The signal horn sounded. The entire range fell silent. The supervisor checked the target, then slowly looked up. 5 shots, 5 bullseyes. A long silence hung in the air. Dylan forced a laugh. "Must be a sensor glitch." But the officer in charge rechecked the M4's sight that Avery had used, then muttered under his breath, "Damn thing's off by nearly half an inch, and she still hits center. God, is she shooting by instinct?" No one spoke again. Only the wind moved, sweeping away every trace of mockery left in the air. From the viewing deck, Colonel Richard Kane, former commander of the Ghost Viper Special Unit, stood abruptly, his hand tightening around his binoculars. His eyes widened. "No way," he murmured. "That's special ops technique. The way she controls her breathing, the trigger pull." Whispers rippled through the recruits. Dylan stood frozen, sweat trickling down his neck. Avery simply removed her ear protection, checked her rifle, set it down, and stood at attention. "Where did you learn that?" the sergeant asked. "From a place," she said quietly. where gunfire wasn't for training. The shooting range went utterly silent. That afternoon, as Avery crossed the yard, the looks that followed her were different, curious, respectful. But there were still a few eyes filled with resentment, the kind that couldn't stand a silence that made them feel small. That evening in the mess hall, the food was gone. Avery sat down with nothing but a cup of cold water. A group of recruits led by Jenna, the one who always had to be seen, approached. "Poor thing," Jenna said sweetly, placing half an apple on Avery's tray. "Wouldn't want you starving, rookie. Go ahead, eat." Laughter erupted behind her. Avery looked up, straight into Jenna's eyes. "Thank you," she said, and took a slow bite of the apple. No smile, no irritation, just calm. So calm it turned that small gesture into the most straightforward answer possible. The room went strangely quiet. Jenna froze, her smirk faltering before she turned away, pretending not to notice. The laughter died completely. Avery stood, walked toward the door, her shadow melting into the soft amber light. Each step is steady, silent. She didn't know that the next day Fort Valor would witness something no base had ever seen. The hand-to-hand combat simulation took place in the sand yard. Dylan Reeves and Avery Cole were paired together. When the whistle blew, he charged, anger packed into every punch. Avery slipped aside, dodging with movements so fluid it was as if the wind itself bent around him. "Come on," he shouted. "If you're so good, hit me." She said nothing. She waited. Then, one step forward, one clean motion. She looped her arm, locked his neck. A sharp crack. 8 seconds. Dylan lay still on the ground, unconscious. And that was when her shirt tore. A black tattoo revealed itself, a coiled snake wrapped around a silver skull. The entire training field went dead silent. Colonel Kane strode forward, face pale, voice rasping. "Who authorized you to wear that emblem?" Avery stood straight, sunlight catching her gray eyes, cold and steady as stone. "I didn't ask for it," she said. "It was given to me, by Ghost Viper." The colonel froze. Then slowly he stood at attention and saluted. A gesture no one at Fort Valor had ever seen him give. Silence rippled outward. The whispers stopped. Fort Valor, the base that once laughed at the lost girl, suddenly seemed to hold its breath. From a distance, Captain Mason Hart approached, his gaze fixed on her. After a long pause, he nodded, voice deep and resolute. "Effective immediately, Cadet Avery Cole is appointed honorary instructor." Avery bowed her head. No smile, no pride. She simply pulled her torn shirt back in place, slung her backpack over her shoulder, and walked off into the quiet sunlight. And as her shadow faded from view, every head lowered, not in fear, but in respect. None of them knew that the tattoo wasn't just an emblem. It was a symbol of something more profound. It was a promise she had carried, on her skin and in her heart, for 6 long years. Morning at Fort Valor began under a pale white light, thin as smoke, crawling over the barbed wire fences and settling softly on the faded tin roofs. No one spoke, yet everyone felt it. The air had changed. People no longer laughed when Avery walked by. They only watched quietly, then looked away quickly as if afraid to meet her eyes. She still moved with that same calm rhythm, her old backpack swaying lightly behind her. Captain Hart stood beneath the command porch, a cup of cold coffee in his hand, his gaze following her steps. Curious, uneasy, and strangely respectful. He didn't understand why the woman once mocked by the entire base now made him feel the urge to stand at attention when she passed. That morning's lesson was tactical strategy, a class on defensive formations. Major Claire Cleaney, a notoriously cold and exacting officer, stood before the map, her sharp voice cutting through the room. "Any error in a battle diagram," she said, "is a graveyard for your whole unit. We do not assume. We are precise." The classroom was silent, the only sound the quick scratching of pens. In the last row, Avery bent over a small notebook, jotting something down. Cleaney noticed, her brow tightening. "Cadet Cole," she called, her tone edged with challenge. "What are you writing? Something more important than my strategy?" A few quiet laughs flickered across the room. Avery looked up, her pale gray eyes steady. "Yes," she said evenly. "You've left your left flank exposed. If ambushed, we'll lose half the unit in under 3 minutes." The laughter died instantly. Cleaney glanced back at the map, momentarily frozen. "What did you say?" Avery stood, walked to the board and pointed swiftly at the lines. "Here. This route's open. The enemy could loop through the tree line here for a firing angle. If a recon team is placed along this ridge, they'll spot the approach before the ambush hits. And if pressed..." Her finger tapped the map softly. "This path here is the only viable retreat." Cleaney was silent for a few seconds. Her expression softened slightly before she gave a slight nod. "Note that down," she said to her aide. "That's more effective than my original plan." A quiet ripple moved through the room. No one said a word, but something had changed in their eyes. As Avery returned to her seat, Brooke Tanner lowered her head, biting her lip. No sarcasm left. She knew she had just witnessed something far beyond what a recruit should be capable of. That afternoon, the urban combat simulation took place. Avery was assigned as team leader, and Brooke led the reconnaissance group. As they entered the ruined complex, Avery raised a hand, signaling danger ahead. But Brooke, in a flash of pride, ignored it and rushed forward. A sharp explosion split the air. A training trap detonated, sirens blaring. Mission failed. Captain Hart stormed over, furious. "Cole, you let your team trigger a trap! Do you realize how many points you just lost?" Brooke gasped, babbling. "I didn't see her signal. She didn't say anything." Avery's reply was calm, clipped. "I gave the order. She chose not to follow." Fort Valor went silent. No one argued, but no one defended her either. Hart was about to end the exercise when a drone operator shouted, "Sir, we've got video." On screen, the footage played. Avery's signal, clear and precise. Brooke's disregard unmistakable. The control room fell silent again. Hart turned, voice heavy. "Tanner, 10-point deduction. Dismissed." Brooke stood frozen, face flushed red. As Avery walked past, no one dared meet her gaze. From that day forward, she became a quiet presence that everyone watched. She never yelled. She didn't command through volume. She led by example. How to lower a rifle slowly, how to squeeze the trigger with your heartbeat, how to hold your breath against the wind. People began to learn in silence. Some took notes. Some simply observed. Dylan Reeves had been transferred to logistics. Brooke spoke less. No one dared to mock anymore. During a first aid simulation, Avery was paired with Eli Grant. His hands shook as he wrapped the bandage too loosely, fake blood seeping through. The group behind them snickered. Avery said nothing. She just stepped closer, gently took his hands and showed him the movements again. "You don't need to be fast," she murmured. "Just steady. In the real thing, one loose rap can kill someone." The laughter stopped. Eli nodded, face flushed. Sergeant Carter, observing nearby, said simply, "Good. That's how real soldiers work." A week passed. Fort Valor was no longer the same. Then, one quiet noon, a young officer entered the training yard looking for Avery. "Ma'am," he said softly, "someone's here to see you at the gate." She followed him down the gravel path, sunlight glinting off the stones. There a man stood waiting, tall, composed, silver streaks in his hair, his black jacket crisp and neat. As he turned, the wind lifted his coat hem, revealing the gleam of a silver rank insignia. Colonel Kane stood nearby, his voice formal and steady. "Cadets, attention! This is General Lucas Reed." The entire base snapped to attention. General Reed gave a brief nod, saying nothing. His eyes scanned the formation until they found Avery, and for a moment, the hardness in his gaze softened. She stopped in front of him just a few steps apart. "You didn't have to come here," she said quietly. "I had to," he replied, a faint smile tugging at his lips. Kane cleared his throat and spoke slowly. "General Reed is Avery Cole's husband." The courtyard froze. Blank faces, wide eyes. No one spoke. General Reed placed a hand on her shoulder and gave a slight nod. Then the two of them walked away together, toward the old Ford F-150. The engine rumbled, kicking up a swirl of red dust. As the truck rolled past the gates, the wind caught the flag, sending it whipping violently, like a delayed salute. That night, Fort Valor was eerily still. Colonel Kane sat in his office, setting a black envelope on Captain Hart's desk, embossed with the coiled snake and silver skull insignia. "This," he said quietly, "is her training file. Classified. Exceptional level clearance. She was the final trainee of Ghost Viper." Hart opened it, finding only a few handwritten lines. "She doesn't need to give orders. Her presence is enough." He sat silent for a long time, then folded the paper and set it down gently. Outside, the wind howled through the corridors, ringing a lone metal bell. From that day on, no one ever spoke of her in jest again. Fort Valor had changed. Those who once laughed learned silence. Those who once scorned learned to bow their heads. And every time a recruit stepped through the gates, they heard the story of the woman who made an entire base stand in reverent silence. Avery Cole never needed to prove anything to anyone. She only needed to exist, and the world listened. In the days after Avery's old Ford F-150 disappeared down the dusty road, Fort Valor felt like an entirely different base. Mornings came without loud voices, without pointless teasing. Every recruit, upon stepping onto the field, would look up at the flag, then silently tighten their laces. No one said it out loud, but everyone knew. They had witnessed something no soldier would ever forget. A woman once scorned, who had walked through the red dust and left as a symbol. Colonel Kane received a telegram that Tuesday morning. A black seal, the snake coiled around the skull. Ghost Viper. He opened it. Inside were only a few words. "Cole has left the camp. New mission. Classified. Do not contact." No signature. He folded the paper and exhaled slowly. There was something every soldier understood. When people like her left, it was because they belonged to places no one else was allowed to go. And so Fort Valor remained. The training grounds are emptier, the whistles shorter, sharper. Captain Hart still gave orders, as always, but his tone had changed. Lower, steadier. He no longer barked to assert authority. He commanded as if every order was a lesson he too was learning again. Brooke Tanner still trained, still wore her sidearm, but the arrogance in her eyes was gone. During breaks, she often sat quietly at the edge of the yard, staring at the space where Avery used to stand. Once, Eli Grant sat beside her and asked softly, "Where do you think she went?" Brooke only whispered, "Probably somewhere we don't have the courage to go." But Avery's story didn't end there. One night, a video surfaced online. Footage from the hand-to-hand combat test at Fort Valor. The moment Dylan tore her shirt. The moment the tattoo appeared. The moment Colonel Kane stood at attention and saluted. No one knew who had uploaded it, perhaps a nameless recruit. The clip spread across military forums, was watched, debated, and then quietly respected. Some called her a legend. Others said she was a reminder that silence can be stronger than authority. Brooke Tanner, once Avery's harshest critic, lost her military sponsorship when the video went viral. The defense company backing her canceled her contract, citing image concerns. She packed her gear and left Fort Valor quietly. No one saw her off. When the steel gates closed behind her, she turned for one last look. The wind caught her hair, and for the first time she whispered, "I'm sorry." Dylan Reeves, the man Avery had taken down in 8 seconds, was investigated. The report concluded that misconduct and excessive aggression were observed during training. He was discharged from the Army within 3 weeks. No one saw him again. Fort Valor continued to exist, but no longer as a place that trained egos. It became a place where people learned how to be silent when silence was needed. Captain Hart changed, too. His eyes softened, and whenever recruits arrived, his opening line was always the same. "Here, don't prove yourself with words. Prove it by standing firm." In the old barracks, under the last bed in the women's quarters, someone found a worn photograph, creased, slightly faded. A man in a black jacket stood beside a young woman, her faint smile captured mid-breath. On the back, written in pen, "This isn't a badge. It's a promise." Eli Grant, the recruit who had once helped Avery during the navigation test, kept the photo. He carried it in the chest pocket of his uniform, taking it with him to the field every day. Sometimes, when the morning light filtered through the fence, he thought he could hear her voice, low, warm, carried on the wind. "You don't need to speak loud. Just do it right." The story of Avery Cole spread far beyond Fort Valor. In a small veterans bar in Denver, they told her story, the woman with the black snake tattoo, not as a legend, but as gratitude. Because for everyone who had ever been underestimated, overlooked, or dismissed, her name became a symbol of something they'd never found words for. That silence isn't weakness. Sometimes, it's the strongest way to survive. A year later, Colonel Kane retired, handing over command. At the ceremony, as he stepped down from the podium, a young officer asked, "Sir, was that story real?" Kane paused, smiling faintly, his gaze drifting toward the distant ridges. "She once told me," he said, "true strength doesn't come from shouting. It comes from the courage to stay silent when the whole world screams." Then he turned away, his figure fading into the deep crimson light of sunset. Fort Valor slowly returned to its rhythm, but on the hallway wall they mounted a small brass plaque. Etched into it were simple words, True strength doesn't shout. It stands still. Every morning when recruits passed by, they stopped for a few seconds, not to read, but to feel. Because at Fort Valor, everyone knew. True legends never really leave. They simply stand there, in the memory of those who once saw them walk through the sunlight. Head held high, voice quiet enough for the wind to listen. That winter came earlier than usual. The wind that swept across the Rockies was sharp enough to scrape the old flags on Fort Valor's steel poles. Fog blanketed the training yard every morning, and when the wake-up siren wailed, hundreds of recruits stepped out into the mist, their breaths turning white in the cold. No one joked anymore. No one complained. Those young soldiers carried something new now, a strange kind of quiet, like the stillness that lingers after a storm. Eli Grant stood in the front row, his eyes lifted to the new brass plaque mounted at the camp gate. True strength doesn't shout. It stands still. Beneath the inscription was a small emblem, a black snake coiled around a silver skull. No one said it, but everyone knew what it meant. It was her mark. Avery Cole. Avery Cole. She had never returned to Fort Valor, yet in the way people trained, in how officers lowered their voices when giving orders, in how the recruits looked at each other with quiet respect, she was still there. No face, no name, just what she had left behind. An attitude, a posture, a promise. Colonel Kane, now retired, sometimes came back on empty afternoons. He would sit on the cold concrete steps, his eyes on the foggy ridge lines. "I've seen many strong people," he once told a young lieutenant softly. But she was different. She never needed applause. She just needed to keep her promise. Farther west, deep inside a small base hidden within the forests of Wyoming, a group of special operators trained in the midst of falling snow. No name tags, no insignia, no ranks. They called the program Silent Viper. The team leader, a woman in a black jacket, hair tied low, eyes like the winter wind, raised her hand for them to stop. She crouched, adjusted the stance of a young recruit, and said quietly, "Don't rush. Breathe deep. Keep your rhythm." The recruit, a young man with a thin scar on his cheek, nodded. "Yes, Instructor Cole." Avery straightened, gazing out at the snow-covered forest ahead. In the cold wind, she could almost hear echoes from Fort Valor. The whistle, the sound of boots striking earth. The past blending into her breath in the present. A soldier's life, she thought, wasn't just a journey of sweat and blood. It was a journey of learning how to be silent amid the world's noise. She touched the tattoo on her back through the fabric of her jacket. The faint memory of the needle still burned under her skin. And in her mind, the voice of Ghost Viper returned. "This isn't a badge. It's a promise." She smiled, softly, and whispered into the cold air, "I'm still keeping it." On her way back to the training ground, she stopped by a large rock, picked up a stick, and carved a small line into the frozen soil. "For those who keep walking." Then she rose, shoulders straight, eyes toward the horizon. The snow kept falling, each flake landing gently on her hair, melting away without a trace. Back at Fort Valor, a recruit had just stepped through the gate, backpack heavy on his shoulders, face still young. He looked at the brass plaque, read each word slowly, then lifted his head and smiled. In his eyes was the same light Avery had carried on her first day at the camp. Calm, quiet, but unshakable. And so the story of Avery Cole did not end. It simply continued. In every breath of the young soldiers learning to be strong without being loud, learning to stand firm in the storm without needing to be seen. Because somewhere, on a snow-covered training field, the woman with the black snake tattoo was still standing. Silent, but present. Sometimes strength isn't in the shout. It's in the moment you choose silence, even when the world roars. If this story resonated with you, please share it, because somewhere out there someone might be needing a reason to keep standing. This is Deep Life Tales, where we tell the stories of those who don't need noise to be extraordinary. Like, share, and leave a comment, not for the algorithm, but for someone who might need to hear this truth. Silence is also a way to live a strong life.